An 8-year-old billionaire's daughter walked onto a plane, but when she got to her seat, a grown man was already in it, and he refused to move. The moment Alyssa Davenport stepped into the jet bridge at Dallas Love Field Airport, she felt like the luckiest 8-year-old alive. Her tiny sneakers squeaked against the floor as she held onto her nanny's hand, trying to keep up with the line of passengers shuffling toward the plane. Alyssa's eyes darted everywhere. The blinking lights, the rolling suitcases, the flight attendants greeting each traveler at the door. This wasn't just any flight for her. This was her first time flying in first class. Her dad had told her just the night before, "Sweetheart, you've worked hard in school, and you deserve this treat. You'll see what comfort feels like up there in the front of the plane." Alyssa's dad, Jonathan Davenport, knew exactly what he was doing. As a self-made billionaire in the tech world, he never forgot what it was like growing up with nothing. He wanted his daughter to experience the kind of respect and opportunity he fought so hard to secure. "Do I really get to sit in the big seat?" Alyssa had asked him, her eyes widening with excitement. "Bigger than you can imagine," he chuckled, kissing her forehead. "You'll feel like royalty, pumpkin." Now, standing at the aircraft door, Alyssa tugged on her nanny's hand. "Do you think they'll give me juice?" "Like orange juice, but in a glass with ice." Her nanny, Miss Ruth, smiled warmly. "I think they'll give you anything you ask for, sweetheart. Just wait and see." They turned into the first-class cabin, and Alyssa gasped. The wide leather seats looked more like armchairs than anything she'd ever seen on a plane. Passengers were already settling in, laptops open, headphones on, phones in hand. She clutched her boarding pass like it was treasure, scanning the row numbers until she spotted her seat, 2A. "There it is," she whispered, bouncing on her toes. But as she got closer, her little steps slowed. Her seat, the one with her number printed clearly on the ticket in her hand, wasn't empty. A man in a gray suit, with neatly combed salt and pepper hair, was already sitting there. He looked comfortable, one leg crossed over the other, his phone pressed to his ear. Alyssa frowned and checked her ticket again. 2A, then back at the seat. Still 2A. She tilted her head, confused. "Ms. Ruth," she said softly, tugging her nanny's arm. "That's my seat." Ruth leaned over, her polite smile never leaving her face. "Excuse me, sir," she began in a calm voice. "I believe this seat belongs to my little one here. Do you mind checking your ticket?" The man, Christopher Langford, didn't even glance at Alyssa. He sighed into his phone, then looked up at Ruth with a dismissive wave. "This is my seat. I've flown this route for years." Must be some mistake. Alyssa's tiny fingers tightened around the ticket. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice came out small. "It says 2A. That's my seat." Christopher finally looked at her then, his eyes narrowing slightly. "First class?" He gave a quick laugh, short and sharp. "Kid, these seats cost more than most people's rent. I think you should be back there with the others." He gestured toward economy without even hiding his irritation. Ruth straightened her back, her voice firmer now. "Sir, her father purchased this seat for her. It's clearly printed right here." She held out the boarding pass. "We'd appreciate it if you could double-check yours." Alyssa's heart pounded. She could feel eyes on her from the nearby rows. Passengers pretending not to watch, but their sideways glances gave them away. Her cheeks warmed as she shifted from one foot to the other, wishing her dad was here to speak up for her. But the man wasn't budging. He leaned back in the seat, adjusting his tie. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not moving. You can sort it out with the crew if you like." Alyssa blinked up at her nanny, unsure what to do next. She'd never seen a grown-up act like this before. But before Ruth could respond, a flight attendant started walking down the aisle. And that's when things began to change. Alyssa had always been taught to stay humble, no matter what her last name meant. Her dad, Jonathan Davenport, reminded her almost every morning, "Money can buy you things, sweetheart, but it can't buy respect. Respect is earned in how you treat people." That's why this flight meant so much to her. For weeks, she had begged her dad to let her sit up front, to see what it was like on the other side of the curtain. Jonathan had laughed at first, but the night before her trip, he surprised her with the printed ticket. "First class, seat 2A, he said, handing it over like it was a golden ticket. "Don't lose it. It's your proof you belong up there." Alyssa had clutched it all night, even slept with it under her pillow, afraid it might vanish. She wasn't thinking about legroom or fancy food. She was thinking about how proud her dad looked when he gave it to her, like he was giving her a small piece of his journey. Jonathan grew up in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 4 kids in a house that barely fit them. He often told Alyssa about the days when he ate peanut butter sandwiches 3 times a day just to get through school. He built his company from the ground up, starting with secondhand computers in his garage. And though he now wore tailored suits and drove cars that turned heads, he never forgot those days. Alyssa was too young to understand the weight of her father's story, but she understood this much. He wanted her to walk through the world with her head high, knowing she had every right to be where she was. So when she saw Christopher Langford lounging in her seat, it wasn't just about the leather chair. It was about the promise her dad had made, that she belonged. Ms. Ruth noticed Alyssa's grip tightening on the boarding pass. She crouched down to meet Alyssa's eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You've got your ticket. That's all the proof you need." Alyssa nodded, though her stomach felt heavy. She wanted to believe Ruth, but Christopher's words had stuck to her like burrs. "These seats cost more than most people's rent. You should be back there with the others." She wanted to shout that her dad worked harder than anyone, that he earned this, but the words stayed trapped in her chest. Just then, the flight attendant arrived, a woman in her early 30s, with her hair pulled into a neat bun. Her name tag read Miss Torres. She offered a professional smile, but it faltered slightly when she noticed Alyssa's face. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, looking between Ruth, Alyssa, and Christopher. Ruth straightened. "Yes, there seems to be some confusion. My little one's seat has been taken. She's in 2A. Christopher raised his eyebrows, as if he couldn't believe he had to explain himself again. "This is my seat. I've flown this flight more times than I can count. Maybe they printed her ticket wrong." Ms. Torres extended her hand, and Alyssa hesitated before passing her the boarding pass. The attendant's eyes scanned it quickly. She nodded. "Seat 2A, first class, that's correct." She turned to Christopher. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" He shifted uncomfortably in the seat. "I'm on an important call," he muttered, lifting his phone as if that excused him. Ms. Torres didn't budge. "Sir, I'll need to see your ticket to verify." For the first time, Christopher's confidence seemed to waver. He patted his suit pocket, then the inside of his jacket. He finally produced a crumpled boarding pass and handed it over. Ms. Torres read it carefully, her eyebrows furrowed. "You're in 3C, sir, just 1 row back. This seat does not belong to you." A hush seemed to fall over the nearby passengers. Alyssa's chest swelled a little, a flicker of pride breaking through her nerves. She had been right. Her dad had been right. But instead of moving, Christopher scoffed, crossing his arms. "This is ridiculous. Why should I move back a row when the kid will barely use the space? She won't appreciate it anyway." But the flight attendant wasn't the only one waiting for his answer. Other passengers were now starting to murmur, and the tension in the cabin was only getting heavier. Ms. Torres held the 2 boarding passes in her hand like evidence in a trial. She glanced again at Christopher, her tone firmer now. "Sir, your ticket clearly states 3C. That's 1 row behind this seat. You'll need to move." Christopher leaned back, spreading his arms across the seat as though to claim it more strongly. His voice rose, not enough to shout, but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "You expect me to move for a child? This is absurd. I'm a paying customer, not some babysitter in the sky." Gasps rippled from a few passengers. Alyssa felt every pair of eyes burning into her tiny frame. Her cheeks heated, and she sank a little closer to Ruth. Ruth spoke calmly but firmly, her southern accent sliding through her words. "Sir, nobody's questioning whether you paid for your seat. But this seat doesn't belong to you. It belongs to her." She rested a protective hand on Alyssa's shoulder. Alyssa finally found her voice, soft but steady. "My daddy bought it for me," she said. "He said I belonged here." Christopher's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. His words came out sharp. "Little girl, your daddy might have money, but that doesn't mean you understand what this section is for. Some of us are trying to get work done, not play tea party at 30,000 feet. A woman across the aisle lowered her tablet, her face pinched with disbelief. "She has a boarding pass." "You don't. Why is this even a debate?" Christopher turned toward her, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, thank you, judge and jury. I'll be sure to consult you the next time an airline makes a mistake." The woman didn't back down. "It's not the airline. It's you. You're refusing to move. A man in row 1, clearly irritated by the delay, groaned. "Can we get this sorted?" Some of us have connections to make Ms. Torres lifted a hand to quiet the murmurs, but Christopher kept going. "Look, this is about common sense. She's 8 years old. She doesn't need this seat. She won't even appreciate it. Let her sit with the nanny back there." Ruth's eyes flashed. "I will not have you talking about her like she's invisible. She belongs here because this is her ticket. End of story." Alyssa's small hands clenched into fists in her lap. She wanted to cry, but she also wanted to prove him wrong. Her dad's words echoed in her mind. "Walk through the world with your head high, no matter who doubts you." The tension was starting to thicken in the air. Ms. Torres crouched slightly, making eye contact with Alyssa. Her voice softened. "Honey, don't you worry. You're right where you're supposed to be." Then she stood tall again, facing Christopher. "Sir, if you don't move immediately, I'll have to call security to assist." That word, security, stirred the cabin even more. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in closer, eager to see what would happen next. Christopher let out a bitter laugh. "Security? For what? For sitting in a chair? This is insanity." Another passenger, a middle-aged man with a baseball cap, muttered just loud enough for the row to hear, "No, it's called entitlement." The word stung. Alyssa didn't fully understand it, but she could tell from the way Christopher's jaw tightened that it wasn't meant as a compliment. He snapped back at the man in the cap. "Mind your own business. This doesn't concern you." But now it did. The more Christopher spoke, the more passengers seemed unwilling to stay quiet. Murmurs spread across the cabin, frustration mixing with disbelief. Some whispered words like unfair and rude, while others shook their heads in silence. Ruth leaned down to Alyssa again. "Sweetheart, it's not your fault." Remember that Alyssa nodded slowly, her eyes stinging, but refusing to let tears fall. Ms. Torres radioed quietly into her walkie-talkie, her voice measured. "Captain, we've got a non-compliant passenger in 2A, requesting guidance." Christopher's eyes widened slightly. Wait a second. You're going to ground this plane because I'm sitting in a seat?" Ms. Torres didn't answer. She only held his crumpled boarding pass out toward him. "Your assigned seat is 3C. If you don't take it, you won't be flying today." For the first time, Christopher hesitated. His bravado faltered, but his pride kept him locked in place. The passengers could sense it too. The battle wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about ego, about control, about who got to decide who belonged where. But just as it seemed he might give in, Christopher crossed his arms tighter and said 4 words that made the entire cabin stiffen. "Then ground the plane." "Then ground the plane." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the steady beeps and clicks of seatbelts fastening seemed to pause. Alyssa's stomach flipped. She had never heard someone challenge authority so boldly. The woman across the aisle shook her head, muttering under her breath. "Unbelievable." A man in row 2 leaned forward, addressing Christopher directly. "Sir, are you hearing yourself? You're holding up 100 people because you don't want to sit 1 row back." Christopher sneered. 1 row back? That's not the point, it's the principle. First class isn't daycare, it's not a playground for spoiled kids. The words cut Alyssa sharper than she expected. She lowered her eyes, wishing she could disappear. Ms. Ruth immediately placed her arm around her shoulders, glaring at Christopher. "Don't you dare talk to her like that," Ruth said firmly. "She is a child, and she's more respectful than you've been this entire time." The man with the baseball cap from earlier chimed in. "Lady's right. This isn't about a kid in a seat. It's about a grown man throwing a tantrum." A chuckle rose from somewhere behind them, though it was quickly stifled. The tension was thick, but the passengers were no longer silent observers. They had become witnesses and judges. Ms. Torres, still calm but visibly strained, raised her voice slightly. "Everyone, please remain seated. We're working on resolving the issue." But Christopher leaned forward, pointing at Alyssa now. "Tell me how this makes sense. She won't appreciate the seat, she won't use the perks, and yet I'm the one asked to move? I run a business. I've got deals to close, meetings to attend." The woman with the tablet snapped back. "You run a business? Good for you. So does her father. And he bought her this seat, same as you bought yours." A low hum of agreement spread through the cabin. Alyssa felt it. The shift. Some people were with her now. She glanced up nervously, catching the woman's eye. The stranger gave her a small, encouraging smile, the kind adults give to show everything will be okay. Still, the man in her seat wasn't done. You people don't get it. This isn't about money. This is about standards. At that, Ruth's voice rose sharper than before. And what standard is that, sir? That an 8-year-old black girl doesn't belong in the same section as you? That she has to prove she deserves what was already paid for? Because that's what you're really saying. The cabin went quiet again. Alyssa's chest tightened. She wasn't sure what Ruth meant by prove, but she knew the tone. Strong, almost trembling with anger. Christopher opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, his face flushed and he looked away, yet pride still pinned him to the seat. Ms. Torres spoke carefully, as though weighing every syllable. Sir, this isn't optional. Either move to your assigned seat or we will have you removed from the aircraft. The pilot's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a delay in departure due to a seating dispute. Please remain calm as we address the matter. Safety comes first. Groans rippled across the cabin now. Passengers tapped at their watches, shook their heads, sighed deeply. A woman in the back called out, I have a connection in Phoenix. Come on already. Alyssa shrank deeper into Ruth's side, guilt pressing on her small shoulders. She whispered, Ms. Ruth, this is all my fault. Ruth bent low, cupping Alyssa's chin so their eyes met. Don't you ever think that, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. You're supposed to be right here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But even as Ruth reassured her, Alyssa couldn't help but glance around. She saw the impatience, the frustration, the anger, not aimed at Christopher alone, but at the situation itself. And she felt small, smaller than she ever had before. Christopher, still rooted in the seat, crossed his arms and smirked. See? Now nobody's happy, and all because we can't use common sense. But before anyone else could answer him, 2 uniformed crew members appeared from the galley, their eyes set directly on Christopher's row. And the cabin knew things were about to escalate even further. The 2 crew members moved with quiet authority. One was a tall man in his late 30s with a shaved head, the other a shorter woman with a calm but serious face. Their uniforms were sharp, their body language even sharper. Ms. Torres quickly briefed them in low tones, holding out both boarding passes. The taller crew member glanced at Christopher, then at Alyssa, his eyes softening when he noticed how tightly she clutched her ticket. Sir, he said firmly, your assigned seat is 3C. We need you to move there now so we can depart. Christopher leaned back, his lips curling into a stubborn grin. I already told the other one. I'm not moving for a child. Let her sit with her nanny. This whole situation is ridiculous. The shorter crew member crossed her arms. What's ridiculous, sir, is that we're delayed because you refuse to comply with a very simple request. Boarding passes don't lie. Seat 2A belongs to her. The businessman gave a short laugh, though it sounded forced. What are you going to do? Drag me out? I've seen the videos. Doesn't end well for airlines, does it? That comment triggered murmurs from the back. A man muttered, he's testing them. A woman whispered to her neighbor, he's enjoying this. Alyssa felt her throat tighten. She wanted to vanish into the wide leather of the seat next to her, but Ruth's steady hand on her shoulder kept her grounded. The taller crew member's voice dropped lower, firmer. Sir, if you don't move immediately, the captain has instructed us to call airport security. You'll be removed from this flight and possibly banned from future travel with this airline. The businessman's smirk wavered, but only slightly. He shook his head slowly. Banned? For not moving 1 row? That's your story. Ms. Torres's patience had clearly worn thin. It's not the row, sir. It's your refusal to follow instructions. Every passenger here has somewhere to be. This is not negotiable. The silence afterward was heavy. Dozens of eyes locked on Christopher, waiting to see if his pride would finally give way. Alyssa tugged gently at Ruth's sleeve. In the smallest voice, she asked, Why won't he let me sit in my chair? Ruth bent low, whispering in her ear, Because some grown-ups care more about being right than doing right. But you hold on, sweetheart. Truth wins in the end. Her words made Alyssa squeeze the ticket tighter. She wanted to believe it. She wanted her dad to be right, that she belonged here, no matter what anyone else thought. But Christopher wasn't finished. He leaned forward, pointing toward Alyssa. Look, nobody here thinks this is normal. She doesn't belong in first class. She doesn't even understand what she's got. The shorter crew member cut him off. Sir, stop. Right now. You're not just refusing to move, you're harassing a child. That ends here. The word harassing stirred more passengers into murmurs. A man a few rows back raised his voice. Yeah, let the girl have her seat already. This is nonsense, another voice joined. She has the ticket. End of story. Alyssa looked up, startled. For the first time, she realized strangers were standing up for her. Her chest lifted a little, though her small hands still trembled. Christopher glanced around, his confidence thinning under the weight of the crowd. He grumbled something under his breath, but still didn't move. The taller crew member reached for his radio. Captain, passenger is refusing final instructions, requesting clearance to deboard. That single word, deboard, sent a ripple through the cabin. People groaned, some cursed under their breath, others sighed loudly in frustration. But the line had been drawn. Christopher stared at the crew, jaw clenched, sweat beating on his temple. His pride was cornering him into a choice. But just when it seemed he might finally cave, the captain's voice returned over the intercom with a chilling update. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will not depart until this matter is resolved. We are grounding the aircraft until further notice. The captain's words rolled through the cabin like a thunderclap. We are grounding the aircraft until further notice. Passengers groaned louder now. Some muttered about missing connections, others shook their heads in disbelief. A man in business attire slammed his laptop shut, muttering, "Unbelievable," all because one guy won't move. Alyssa shrank back into Ruth's side, whispering, "Ms. Ruth, everybody's mad." Ruth brushed a hand over her curls gently. "They're not mad at you, honey. Don't you carry that weight." But it was impossible not to. Alyssa could feel the eyes on her, heavy like stones. She thought of her dad's words again. Walk with your head high. Her little chin lifted just a fraction. Christopher, however, leaned forward, his voice sharp. You hear that? This whole plane isn't moving because of this circus. And you're blaming me? She's a child. She doesn't even need the seat. The shorter crew member stepped closer, lowering her tone, but making sure everyone could hear. Sir, let's be clear. You're not the victim here. You're refusing a simple instruction. That's why this plane isn't moving. The woman with the tablet spoke up again, louder now. She's 8 years old, and she's handled this better than you have. Applause broke out, small at first, then building from a few rows. Alyssa's eyes widened. Strangers, complete strangers, were clapping for her. The sound warmed her chest, though she still felt nervous. Christopher's face reddened. Oh, wonderful. Now we're doing applause? You people don't understand what's happening here. This isn't about the girl. It's about the airline making a mistake and punishing me for it. The man in the baseball cap fired back. No mistake. You're just too proud to move your behind one row back. Laughter scattered across the cabin. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to rattle Christopher further. His hand tightened around the armrest. Ms. Torres spoke again, her patience nearly gone. Sir, this is the final time I'll ask. Move to 3C, or you'll be escorted off the plane. He glared up at her, his voice almost a growl. You think you can embarrass me? In front of everyone? For a kid who doesn't belong here? That last line snapped something in Ruth. She rose to her full height, her voice firm enough to silence the cabin. Don't you dare say she doesn't belong. She belongs wherever her ticket says she does, and you don't get to decide her worth. A hush fell. Even Alyssa looked up at Ruth in awe. She had never heard her nanny sound so fierce. The taller crew member tapped his radio again. Security is on its way. Christopher's eyes darted toward the front of the plane, then the back. His bravado faltered. For the first time, he looked trapped. Passengers shifted in their seats, watching, waiting. A woman whispered, Good. Get him off. Another said, About time. Alyssa clutched her ticket tighter, whispering to Ruth, Will they really take him away? Ruth bent low. If he doesn't move, yes. That's what happens when you break the rules. But before security could arrive, Christopher leaned forward, pointing at Alyssa again. This is going to haunt her, you know. She'll remember this. She'll grow up thinking she's entitled to everything. And you're all applauding it, the woman across the aisle shot back without hesitation. No, she'll remember standing her ground against a grown man who tried to bully her, and she'll remember strangers who had her back. Another round of clapping started, louder this time. The sound filled the cabin, and Alyssa's chest swelled with something she couldn't name. Relief, pride, maybe even courage. Christopher looked around, realizing the tide had fully turned against him. His shoulders slumped. He muttered under his breath, but it was too quiet to hear. The shorter crew member nodded firmly. That's it. Sir, you'll be escorted out when security arrives. Christopher shook his head. Fine. Fine. You want me to move? I'll move. He shoved himself out of the seat with exaggerated force, snatching his bag from under the seat. He stomped back to 3C, collapsing into it with a huff. The passengers clapped again, this time not scattered, but unified. A wave of approval rolled forward and back, echoing in the cabin. Alyssa blinked in surprise, then smiled, small but genuine. She whispered, "They were clapping. For me?" Ruth squeezed her hand. "No, sweetheart. They were clapping for what's right, but even though Christopher had moved, the damage was already done. And the captain's decision about the grounded flight wasn't going to change just yet." The clapping faded, but the tension lingered. Christopher sat slouched in 3C, arms crossed, glaring at the floor as if it had wronged him. He muttered under his breath, but nobody cared to listen anymore. Ms. Torres gave Alyssa a reassuring smile before heading back toward the galley. The taller crew member leaned toward Ruth. "We'll need a moment. The captain wants to speak directly." Within seconds, the intercom buzzed again. The captain's steady voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Due to the earlier disruption, we're required to complete additional paperwork and security checks before departure. This aircraft will remain grounded until cleared. I understand the inconvenience, but safety and order must come first." Groans erupted immediately. A man shouted from the back, "You've got to be kidding me!" Another woman waved her phone in frustration. "I'm missing my connection!" The anger spread like wildfire. Some passengers glared at Christopher openly now, their frustration no longer hidden. Others just buried their faces in their hands, defeated by the delay. Alyssa sat still, her ticket still clutched tightly. She whispered to Ruth, "Everyone's mad again." "I didn't mean to make them late." Ruth rubbed her back gently. "Sweetheart, you didn't make them late. One man did. Don't ever take the blame for someone else's behavior." Alyssa tried to believe her, but she could feel the heaviness of the cabin pressing down. It was more than just about time. It was about respect, rules, and how quickly everything could change when someone refused to do the right thing. Christopher leaned toward the aisle, his voice sharp and bitter. "Well, congratulations. You've all got your moral victory. Too bad it cost everyone an hour." This time, the woman with the tablet snapped back immediately. "No, sir. Too bad you cost us an hour." The baseball cap man added, "Yeah, don't blame the kid. You wanted this fight." A few passengers clapped again, though it was shorter this time, fueled more by exhaustion than celebration. The captain's voice returned. "We appreciate your cooperation. Once cleared, we'll resume boarding procedures. Until then, please remain seated." The cabin settled into a tense silence. Alyssa shifted in her oversized seat, glancing at the man who had tried so hard to keep her from it. He looked smaller now, despite his broad frame. Smaller because no one respected him anymore. She turned back to Ruth. "Daddy said money can't buy respect. Was he talking about people like him?" Ruth gave her a soft, proud smile. "Exactly like him. Respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat people when you think no one's watching." That answer settled into Alyssa's young heart like a stone skipping across water, leaving ripples she knew she'd carry with her. The passengers slowly quieted, scrolling on phones, adjusting their seats, whispering to neighbors. The drama had cooled, but the lesson lingered in the stale air of the cabin. For Alyssa, the leather of 2A no longer felt like just a big seat. It felt like a promise her dad had made, a promise Ruth had defended, and a promise strangers had clapped for. But as the engine stayed silent on the tarmac, one truth became clear. The flight might take off later, but what happened here would travel far beyond the runway. The engines finally roared to life nearly an hour later, but the cabin still carried the echo of what had happened. Passengers shifted, sighed, and tried to settle back into the rhythm of travel, yet the story of row 2A lingered in the air like a shadow. Alyssa sat quietly, her small legs dangling above the carpet, her boarding pass tucked safely into her backpack. Ruth leaned back, finally letting out the breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. "You okay, sweetheart?" Ruth asked softly. Alyssa nodded, though her eyes were still thoughtful. Why was he so mad at me? Ruth brushed a hand over her curls. Because sometimes, when people see someone who doesn't look like what they expect, they can't accept it. Doesn't matter if you're a child. Doesn't matter if you're kind. They see what they want to see. Alyssa frowned, processing the words. But Daddy said I belong anywhere my name is on the ticket. Ruth smiled gently. And he's right. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Today proved it. Alyssa leaned her head on Ruth's arm, whispering, I think Daddy would be proud. And he would have been. Proud not because she had sat in a fancy seat, but because she had held her ground even when a grown man tried to take it away. Christopher, meanwhile, sat stiffly in 3C. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody offered him sympathy. He had all the money in the world to buy comfort, but no one in that cabin respected him anymore. Respect wasn't for sale. As the plane climbed into the sky, passengers began to relax. The woman with the tablet leaned across the aisle, smiling at Alyssa. You did nothing wrong, sweetie. Don't forget that Alyssa gave her a shy smile back. Thank you. The man with the baseball cap raised his cup of soda in her direction. To seat 2A, may you always keep what's yours. Scattered chuckles broke the tension, and even Ruth laughed softly, patting Alyssa's hand. For the rest of the flight, Alyssa sat quietly, staring out the window as the clouds stretched below like an endless sea. She didn't fully understand why a seat had caused so much anger, but she understood this much. People had seen her, people had defended her, and she had learned that standing your ground didn't mean standing alone. When the wheels finally touched down in Phoenix, passengers filed out one by one. Some gave Christopher pointed looks, others ignored him completely. But a few paused to smile at Alyssa, to remind her that she had nothing to be ashamed of. Ruth adjusted Alyssa's backpack as they stepped off the plane. Remember this day, sweetheart, she said softly. Not because it was scary, but because it taught you something important. Alyssa looked up. That money doesn't make you right? Ruth nodded. And that kindness, truth, and courage will carry you further than any seat on any plane. The little girl smiled, her heart lighter now. She understood, and she knew her father would want her to carry that lesson everywhere she went. This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's about entitlement. It's about prejudice. And most importantly, it's about the power of standing firm, even when you're only 8 years old. If you take anything from Alyssa's story, let it be this. Never let anyone decide where you belong. Your worth isn't measured by what others say. It's shown in how you carry yourself and how you treat people when no one's watching. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder, because respect, kindness, and courage aren't just lessons for children. They're lessons for all of us.